Hi. What I have up here is Federalist 10 and Federalist 51. After the Constitution was written, it took quite a long time to ratify, and it went around the country. And people would actually get up on soapboxes in small villages and argue about the meaning of the Constitution, because back then people would read instead of just looking at graphics and pointing and clicking. They could actually read. And the debate was pretty pitched over what they were going to do. Nobody knew our state's going to ratify and agree to this Constitution. And in Federalist 10, James Madison, who was one of the authors of the Federalist Papers that argued for this Constitution, for this federal system, people like Patrick Henry were against it. They were afraid of too much central government control, you know, kind of like the Tea Party today. And James Madison said, well, if people were perfect, we wouldn't need government. But guess what? People aren't perfect. We need something. We need a set of rules. Otherwise, it's chaos. It's Lord of the Flies. You got a football game with no referees. We saw what happened early in the season last year when you had these replacement referees. It was kind of anarchical. You need some kind of consistency. And the debate in politics is, if you have too many referees in the game, there's too much control. If you have all referees, it's communism, controlling everything. If you have no referees, it's anarchy and chaos. That's always been the debate in politics. There's a debate right now between Republicans and Democrats. How many referees do we need in a game? We didn't have enough referees in our banking system a few years ago. We had a collapse. People say too many referees, it hurts the free market system. It's an ongoing debate. So in Federalist 10, Madison said, people have a tendency to form factions, form groups. He called it the mischiefs of faction. And in forming factions, people form ethnic groups, carpenters' unions, political parties. And the way to have democracy is to balance faction against faction. So no one has all the power and has all the marbles. Historically, people always thought power should be concentrated. And he came up, along with a couple of other people, particularly him, with this unique move in history. Let's create let's create a house with 3 rooms, and the doors are open, and we can peek on each other. Checks and balances. And nobody can have everything. And here's the room that he created. Separation of power. An executive branch of government, which is our president, a legislative branch of government, and at the time, a judiciary that wasn't that big, didn't have as much power. The executive branch, of course, became George Washington, who was the commander-in-chief, the head of state and head of government. But the power to make war, it lies in the hands of the legislative branch. And we also created a legislative system in which we had a House and a Senate which are equal in power. They both have to pass bills, and neither one is stronger than the other. This is unique in all the world. Every country in the world has a lower house that's more powerful than the upper house, except us. And it makes it tough to pass things, to pass legislation. They made it tough on purpose. They broke up power so no one could control anything by themselves. And they did this on purpose. It's a lot easier to get things done when Adolf Hitler's in control. The old guy said, well, America needs a good dictator. Sure, you get things done, but this is democracy. So the House was under debate right away, because the states that had more of a population, bigger states, would have more representation. The smaller states said, whoa, man, what are we going to do? We don't get even representation. We're not going to sign the Constitution. So they made a great compromise. Each state would get 2 senators. And until 1916, the senators were appointed by state legislatures. They weren't directly elected until 1916. So each state gets 2 senators. So that was the compromise. As far as members of the House, the bigger states get more members. However, suddenly the southern states that had slavery wanted to count African Americans as a whole person, while the abolitionist northern states wanted to count African Americans as a non-person because they're slaves. And they debated back and forth, and finally they came up with a compromise. A slave was worth 3/5 of a person. Kind of 3/5, you know? Not quite a complete person. Today they're up to maybe 9/10, you know. And depending upon certain Supreme Court rulings, it may go up or down. 9/10 of a person. And that's how they compromised to create a constitution. Amazing. Madison also said we are a large and diverse nation, and we're going to do things according to the federal principle. 2 new inventions of history. Federalism and separation of power. Nobody thought to break up power, to make things more inefficient, to get things done not quite as easily. This is what they did. How about the judiciary? What happened there? Well, the judiciary wasn't very powerful. First couple of Supreme Court justices, among them John Jay, didn't like riding around to all these court cases that hurt their butts. And eventually, there was a court case when Thomas Jefferson was president called Marbury versus Madison. Madison was supposed to turn over papers to the Congress, to the House, which was the opposite party from President Jefferson. And he said no. And this was a case that the Supreme Court would look at right away. It wouldn't work their way up through lower courts. And so they looked at the case and they decided in favor of Madison and President Jefferson. But the wording of the decision was such that John Marshall, the Supreme Court Justice, who was about 6'6", just like all these other guys, great horseman, just like George Washington, good athlete, crack shot, good hunter. All these people could do that. They were amazing. He wrote up an opinion which made the case that the Supreme Court not only can make these decisions, but has a right to interpret the language of the Constitution. And the other branches bought into it. Suddenly, wham, we have a third co-equal branch government, the judiciary. And it's been like that ever since. Now these sizes vary. When Franklin Roosevelt was president, the executive branch was bigger. You know, and when Jimmy Carter was president, this was smaller and Congress was bigger. But the relationship remained. It varies. Right now, the Supreme Court is very big. It's made big decisions on Citizens United that corporations are people. So it's got a lot of power. And the power varies depending upon power relationships. And it can vary within a few months. So this is a very fluid, dynamic relationship. But the President appoints a member to the Supreme Court, and the Senate has to confirm it. Checks and balances. They watch each other. Nobody has all the marbles. Nobody can do everything. And we're also lucky, our first president, George Washington, he served 2 terms. And after 2 terms, he decided, for many reasons, but one of them was, nobody should be in power too long. It's not good. So I'm not going to be president anymore. I've done it for 2 terms. What are the odds that your first president is not only a high-quality human being that his soldiers loved and followed him, really was honest, was a straightforward person, but also was not corrupted by power and did not want to be in power too long? How lucky were we, huh? Think about it. How lucky were we? Okay. The judiciary in our system in the United States is one we borrowed from the Brits. It's called a common law or interpreted legal system in which judges interpret the law. And sometimes they can overthrow legislation, saying it's unconstitutional. And sometimes the case works all its way up, all the way to the Supreme Court, and they make the final decision. It's a common law interpreted legal system. Very interesting and very original to have judicial review. We started first. Now other countries are just starting to get the hang of maybe trying to do this, having independent judiciary that's not under pressure from political forces to make decisions because they get their jobs for life. It's pretty amazing. So this is separation of power. No one has all the marbles. This is what they did. Now we're going to talk a little bit about our electoral system in the United States and our political culture. And then we should be done with the United States. And then I'll move on to Great Britain.